Hello everyone and welcome to Daily Dose of Anger, where we are angry about a social justice issue every day. Today I am angry about how most Western comic artists could not figure out how female superheroes' sexuality and bodies work. If you read comics, you probably know what I'm talking about, but if not, please Google Hawkeye Initiative and take a look. Don't worry, I won't be mad. I know you're already on another tab. Now, some of you might say, so what? Comics is a subculture interest for losers who don't have a life. Obviously, their art depicting real women. What's there to be angry about? To which I will say, firstly, you have a point. But secondly, in this podcast, I will delve into the history of female superheroes in comics to point out that the representation of female sexuality, especially in Western superheroines in the latter half of the 20th century, closely relates to the real-life power struggle in society between genders and cultures. This relation is complex and will require a lot more nuanced discussion than we have time today. And even though for most of its existence, the scale has been in favor of white straight men, things are changing fast to include more diverse, authentic female experience, and we better be ready for it. Now, we all know that comics is a traditionally male-dominated medium, so pure sexism has always been the norm, right? After all, if there's no female in the room, how would you know what wearing bikinis isn't practical for fighting? Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. See, as early as 1941, the most iconic female superhero was created, who embodies not only justice, liberty, but also feminism. I'm talking about Wonder Woman, of course. Her costume has not changed much since, but at the time, the citizens of New York were shocked at the way she was dressed. Wonder Woman's story actually simulates a lot of real events that happened during the female suffragist movement in the late 19th and early 20th century from her creators, William Moulton Marston's life. At the time when Amazonian, the tribe of Wonder Woman, actually referred to rebel girls who dared to pursue higher education. So Wonder Woman was kind of a breakthrough. She became a symbol of America while opposing its patriarchy. She became the face of feminism. But then World War II ended and Wonder Woman didn't have Nazis to fight anymore. Her new enemy was one she couldn't beat, a highly conservative administration. In 1954, a psychiatrist named Dr. Frederick Wertham published the book Seduction of the Innocent. He accused comics for corrupting American children with its violence and sex, and he claimed Wonder Woman was promoting bondage and lesbianism, which is only half true, and I'll let you guess which half. The book raised hell in America's Christian majority society, so a thing called the Comic Codes Authority was enforced that censored everything deemed to be obscene. And of course, what can be more obscene than feminism and queer? So Wonder Woman faded into a shadow of her past self. The artist that continued her storyline kept her sexuality and power, but censored the feminist ideology that gave those two things meaning. So Wonder Woman was fighting monster by being a good housewife. The Reagan years intensified even more this double standard. Female superheroes are expected to be hypersexual around men, but deep inside they must still be a virgin. Why? Because a woman who has total liberty and independence to express her sex and sexuality was threatening. The publishers knew what their male audience wanted. By the early 2000s, pretty much all publishers have foregone the comic codes, but the damage has already been done. Female superheroes have been reduced to hypersexualized tokens, a supplement to the masculinity and heterosexuality of pre-existing male heroes. Think about it, like Batman had Batwoman and Batgirl, Spider-Man had Spider-Woman, Spider-Man, Supergirl was Superman's cousin, She-Hulk, of course, belonged to Hulk. All of them were created as an extension to validate the masculinity and sexuality of all these male superheroes. And of course, a male-dominated audience. Politicians were scared of gays, so publishers were like, Yeah, let's add female superheroes so the male heroes could hook up with them. Problem solved. And the children who grew up reading these depictions became writers to continue the legacy, because the comic industry at this point was isolating female readers from it so much that they didn't seem to care if the female readers could relate to the female characters at all. But then one fine day, I was in a comic store in Asgard, and a Spidey Pool comic caught my eyes. So I picked it up, and I noticed a woman in what appears to be Thor's costume, sitting on the cover with Deadpool and Spider-Man. The cover also says Thor, just Thor. So it was like, is this gender bent Thor, alternate universe Thor, female Thor, Thor woman? So I googled all those keywords, but no alternate universe comic showed up. Turns out she was the Thor. Odin's son had lost the right to wield Mjolnir, and the next person worthy to pick up the hammer just happened to be a woman who was dying from cancer. That moment I realized something is happening to American comics. The new women of comics are coming back, and they are even more radical than an Amazonian princess in a swimsuit tying up villains with the lasso of truth. Not long after, I discovered that we now also have a Muslim Miss Marvel, a black Captain America, and a queer Nordic god who happens to be my new favorite comic character. So when the truth bomb exploded, Thor found out that he had a sister who was kidnapped at birth by the angels during the war between Heaven and Asgard, supposedly killed. But it turns out the angels raised her, and she was called, appropriately, Angela. After an adventure with the Guardians of the Galaxy, she went to Asgard to steal Odin's and Freyja's newborn child and took it to Heaven in order to save both of her homes. When she found out that her lover, a trans female magician named Sarah, was captured in Hell, she defeated Hela to be the new queen of Hell and resurrected Sarah. In sum, she is a badass that doesn't let anything stand in her way. I was amazed though by her character design. She had a full body armor that is actually useful in combat. Angela completely stands out from the vast majority of previous female superheroes who were always showing off their body parts in awkward poses. But Angela was not always this queer embodiment of feminism. She was originally created in 1993 in the comic Spawn, wearing a metal bikini, exaggerated curves, in a world where women are, in the word of God, containers of emotions. Naturally, she fell in love with her male enemy during her violent mission. When Marvel acquired Angela in 2012, she became the audience dossier we know and love. What happened? There are three things: feminism, of course, technology, and globalization. When Angela was created in the 1990s, a lot of things were happening in the world. The Cold War just ended, the internet is growing, capitalism was spreading exponentially, the Western world becoming more right-wing. Wonder Woman remake was even worse than the previous decades, with all the hypersexualization and little character, and globalization still seemed like the end of history. Entertainment was commercialized at a staggering rate. There's always new boy bands on TV, new blockbuster movies, and comic writers said to themselves, how do we make people pay attention to my comics? So they turned to the gold standard of consumerism media, sex and violence. The number of female superheroes increased, but they were far from looking like real women. Wonder Woman, the only woman worthy enough of teaming up with Superman and Batman, had bigger boobs, bigger hair, smaller costume. And DC Comics always made the point to stress that she was secondary in power to her male teammates, really just serving as an object of their desire. It was a period where male sexual fantasy was so detached from the authentic female sexuality, and queer relationships were just unthinkable. Angela was created by a new publisher that never picked up the comic codes, so understandably her sexualization and violence were even more brazen. But the very technological development that gave rise to the babes of 90s were also their demise towards the new millennium. The dot-com boom, along with a series of other economic and financial crises, raised doubt about global capitalism. The internet boosted multicultural exchanges, which made counterculture and activism more widespread and rampant. More and more women are graduating from colleges, entering traditionally male-dominated industries, including entertainment and also legislation, and they are taking control of their representation. In sum, things aren't looking very good for conservatives. Soon America would have their first black president, legalize same-sex marriage, and women in all kinds of positions of power. But things weren't just changing in America. There was another comic industry that was gaining global prominence. I'm talking, of course, about Japan. Western culture has been infiltrating Japan since the 19th century, but during the Allies' occupation of Japan after World War II, this influence becomes more and more pronounced. Young girls and women had been a big part of the manga market, both as writers and consumers, so they do get represented often, but rarely more than shy feminine characters in love stories. That is until 1997, when Sailor Moon was born and soon became one of the most popular female superheroes in the world. Sailor Moon was what happened when the brazen display of sex and violence in Western media clashed with a Confucian, highly conservative society such as Japan. Ironically, while enforcing censorship on comics in America, the Allies prohibited any kind of censorship in Japan for fear it would destroy democracy. So Japanese mangakas made a compromise. Girls can have power, but they must be ultra feminine and sexy when they do. It was a middle ground that not only crossed the gender border. Now girls can read fighting stories and boys can read stories about cute pretty girls, but also crossed the cultural border. Sailor Moon brought the magical girl genre of manga to a global phenomenon. But let's take a moment to Google magical girl and look at the image that comes up, okay? Now, can you see if Sailor Moon looks like a typical Japanese person? Does any of them? No, Sailor Moon had blonde hair and blue eyes, and this is not a coincidence. The female superheroes in Japanese comics before Sailor Moon had always had a Western orientation in some way, combined with the Western style costume. I haven't seen any magical girl transform into yukatas or kimono in battle, but maybe I'm just ignorant. It's clear that magical girls are a Western fantasy by Japanese people for Japanese people. In order to be so powerful and sexual, magical girls could not be seen as completely Japanese. It's a subtle but powerful process of othering. And then there's the second layer of othering. While magical girls were mostly young girls with childish personalities and displays quite little sexuality compared to their Western counterparts, the villain in these mangas, when they are female, are often mature and explicitly sexual. The main villain in Sailor Moon has the curves of a mature female body with a costume that clearly accentuates her sexuality. The number of times the female villains seduced Sailor Moon's and her crew's boyfriends as part of their evil scheme is proof of this. This shows a second layer of othering of the female sexuality. When combined with power and liberty, it is equated with evil. It's seen as deviant and dangerous, and sounds a lot like this jealous queen with a destructive sexuality, wanting to kill the beautiful princess so she could become the most beautiful person. That kind of trope in Western fairy tales and Western media really took root in Japanese manga. So no one knows why Sailor Moon was so well received in the Western world. Aside from technical elements such as TV and the internet, the West's historical fascination with the Orient met a female body that satisfies all of his fantasy. Sexual but cute and passive, Strong personality with interesting story, but not enough for her to abandon womanhood and abandon getting married. Beautiful and exotic, but not too exotic so the Western audience can still relate to her. Now, I'm not saying Sailor Moon isn't a badass. I grew up with giant stickers of her in my closet anyway. But when you think about how these cultural products discuss the female sexuality in the context of globalization, what roles they play in society, it has real implications. As I said before, when people grow up with a fabricated image of the female body and sexuality, it influences the way they treat real women, especially those who don't conform to their expectations. But back to Angela and back to her resurrection in the early 2010s. By this point, conservatives were losing their mind. The progressive left-wings are ruining everything, they said. Feminism is destroying the cherished art of comic. Once an untainted land of all white, all straight men and women who all look like porn stars falling in love with any superhero they met. This is just what happens when female artists begin to draw themselves, and almost half of the audience are female. Thanks to the rise of superheroes movies, Western comic books have attracted a much larger and more diverse crowd, and it wasn't sensible anymore to keep the story racially and sexually homogeneous. Angela is unapologetically strong, independent, unsexualized, and queer, just like her writers and readers. She represents the new women in a new world where women's possibilities seem endless. The power dynamic is tipping both in real life and on pages. Thanks for listening to today's dose of anger. Tune in next weekend to be angry with me about modern imperialism in Southeast Asian tourism. Until then, stay angry, stay woke. Bye!